and we are ragging on Americans, thanks to Philomena Cunk. I'm really enjoying this. I hope you do too. I'll admit it's a little bit of a nail biter because, I guess nobody really likes to hear the negatives of their country, but let's face it, Americans, we kind of set ourselves up to be roasted. So let's let her roast us. And being a history channel, I'll provide commentary, also. And don't forget, please continue to submit ideas for videos to react to. I'm loving learning about British history, even if it is kind of in a funny way. I'm trying not to learn too quick so I can have a genuine reaction. So let's see what we have for part 2 here. We're on the revolution, I believe.
Eventually, Washington won, becoming America's first president, the single most revered role in the world, until 2016. I read.
Okay. She did say 2016. That was when. Okay, that's a dig on Donald Trump, which is that's fair. First of all, on George Washington, he was the most revered president. Almost every list that you have for American presidents, he's number 1. Some say number 2. Lincoln might be number 1, but generally speaking, during the war we had with England, the Revolution, he kept the army together. And even when it was just like a ragtag force and things looked like they were going down, he was able to somehow do it. And he was just one of those minds that, people respected him, and he did the work. He put in the work to keep things together on the field for the army and for afterwards for politics. And he was a lot of times great at relationships with people and keeping things moving. When he became president, he could have become king. He could have been, all sorts of stuff. They would call him Your Excellency, Your Majesty, all that stuff. And he just said, no, we don't need that, because he was part of the Enlightenment at that time. The ideas of John Locke that, you vote, and he was voted into office overwhelmingly the first time and the second time. And then he said he would not run for a third time, and he backed away. And even I think it was King George said, was it George? Well, anyway, he said any person who can have full power or along those lines, complete control of a country, and then step back after a period of time and go back to regular life is a better man than I, or something along those lines. And he did that, and he set a precedent for our presidents going forward. When you get to someone like Donald Trump, all of these precedents are no longer, they're not laws. They're things that you do because they're presidential. The FDR kind of pushed was the first person to run for more than 2 terms. And then afterwards, they had to make a rule basically saying no more than 2 terms. And currently we're going through some of those things with Donald Trump as well, because, they're kind of gray areas. There are things that presidents do, and it's understood that when you become that office, you are, well, let's just say it's understood. It's not a law. So he's, going everywhere in terms of it's saying it's not a law. So I can do this. I can do that. And yeah, so I'm not going to get too far into that anymore, but that's I think the United States and the world, they do have interesting reactions to Donald Trump.
Someone that America isn't just a country, but an idea. But it is just a country, isn't it? Having a sandwich, that's an idea. Painting your bicycle blue, that's an idea. Going, that's an idea. America is just a place.
Okay, about that. So America was an idea. Yes, it is true. And it is also a place, but at first it was just the 13 colonies, which became 13 states, with the land going to the Mississippi River. And that created something different. It was the idea that the people could be democratically elected. And it failed the first time, really. It was called the Articles of Confederation. It only lasted for like 9 years or so. And then they realized, okay, you can't have each state have their own power kind of thing, because they were starting to bicker between each other. We almost had states that went to war with each other. So they empowered the government as a whole, because we weren't even able to pay back our war debt after the American Revolution. But then the idea of that, and then of another thing, which was really important, when we negotiated to have all the land that was to the west of the states, to the Mississippi River, that gave us sort of this feeling of, it was called Manifest Destiny, that we could continue to spread our democracy further west. So there's that.
They believed in something called manifest destiny.
There it is.
The belief that all the land belonged to them, and that God wanted them to go west and claim it back from the Native Americans he put there first by mistake.
First things first, yes, Native Americans were there first. Some people prefer the term indigenous. Depends on your PC idea. But it was almost a religious idea. Understand that a lot of people came to the states and the colonies for their own religious freedom. Okay, you have Puritans, you have Jesuits, you have Baptists, you have all these people from the Reformation, and in Europe they weren't really accepted. So if you wanted to practice your religion, when it meant that much to you that you would want to pick up and move to a new place, the United States, or America, or the colonies, I guess, at the time, allowed that to happen. So when it comes to saying, oh my gosh, we have this new land, mind you, no other real place except for South America really had this thing going on where it's like, oh, more land. It could be ours. They made it seem divine or religious. And the Puritan, or not the Puritans, the Mormons were one of the first people to actually go out and do that in the Utah areas. But yeah.
Manifesting your destiny was dangerous. You had to trundle across a perilous landscape in a rickety wagon on the brink of starvation, or shitting yourself to death with dysentery, getting bitten by snakes or butchered by Apaches. Almost as if God didn't want them to do this after all.
That's very true. This is where the idea, and you guys can, definitely tell me I'm wrong on this, but as in my experience, in my understanding, this is where the idea of we are divinely allowed to do this. Now, these days we don't have that sort of divine sort of, we can do what we want, because it's not really that. But we were under the impression, a lot of people were under the impression that you could do what you want moving west. It was your religious future. It was your manifest destiny. The problem is there were a lot of Native Americans who had something to say about that on their way out. But a lot of people did go out there. There was a game called Oregon Trail, and almost always you ended up dying of dysentery when you failed that computer game. But it was a long task. You can still see the Oregon Trail, by the way. These days it goes through Utah. You can see some great trails that are out there. It's still not a very populated area. The center of I would say center west up until the coast is very sparsely populated, and you can just see these tracks. There's even a rock where you can see people have carved their names in there from the 1840s to 1890s. They would just take these, I think they were called Conestoga wagons, out there, and they were rickety, bumpy. You go from one watering hole to the next. There were different shortcuts that weren't shortcuts, and yes, there were Indian attacks. It did happen, and it was a perilous journey. A lot of people died on the way out there.
But Americans back then weren't the humble, unassuming people they still aren't today.
Okay, yes, Americans are not exactly known. It's kind of a stereotype for being humble. A lot of vacation goers are very loud and want this and want that. That's a stereotype. But sometimes stereotypes are very true. And, we do sort of have this air about us, I think, and it's to our detriment that we have an entitlement to go west, an entitlement to run the world after World War II, because we were on the side of the victors in World War One. We come in halfway through, finish the war. We come in halfway through World War II, finish the war, and help everybody rebuild, and we get rich off of it. And then it just does give us it blows us up, and in reality, it's quite different. But what they teach, what is taught, and what is reality is a little different. And I'm not pooping on all Americans; they're not all that way. But if you're vocal and you feel a certain way,
To imagine a world where Edison didn't invent the light bulb, and even if you did imagine it, it would be too dark to see what was in it. So we had daylight during the day and we had candles at night.
Yes.
So we didn't need light bulbs. His life's work was meaningless. That must have been a real moment the first time someone realised a plane needed a toilet. That's more impressive than the Wright brothers.
A plane needed a toilet? Plane needed a toilet? Okay. I love where she comes up with stuff just on a whim. I'm sure some of it is scripted. But when she responds to some of these people, that's not scripted. And I know they are not aware, and the experts, I know they're not aware of what she's actually going to ask. So their response has to be genuine, I assume. And then she comes up with these great things. What a great actor, and what a great mind for comedy.
Part of their national identity. How come Americans have the right to kill anyone they want with a gun?
Well, they don't.
No.
Murder is illegal in the United States.
It is.
But they do have the right to own weapons.
They have the right to bear arms.
Correct.
But bears don't have arms.
They do, actually.
I saw that coming.
They? Yes. I thought they were legs.
Well, I'm not a biologist, but I suppose that when they stand up, they're probably arms.
Okay, real quick on the topic of firearms. Yes, Americans are allowed to have firearms. And by the way, yes, there are certain people that can have class 3 firearms, which are machine guns. It's after John Kennedy, our president, was shot in '63. There was an assault ban bill. I believe that's when it was, if I'm not mistaken. But it had already started with the gangsters in the 1930s because the Tommy gun came out. We used that in World War II as well, modified version. And it was, we were always allowed to bear arms. That was, it was from a well-regulated militia. It was your right to do this, and it was as a result of the Revolutionary War. And it always goes back to the idea of the founding fathers said we could have a well-regulated militia. Now, granted, people do not want to give up their firearms. They don't. There's a lot of hunting that goes on in the United States. It's a big thing here, and there's a very much an idea of you have your own freedoms, and to a certain extent, yes, a firearm can help with that. It's become a real hot topic, and I don't see it ending anytime soon or having any kind of much regulation on it. There's some, but that's pretty much what the thing is there. But you can't kill anybody. Wait, you can actually. There are certain situations. It's called it's stand your ground law. There are some states that have this where if you ask somebody who's broken into your house or someone's coming at you, then you have the right to defend yourself. There are all these ins and outs, and that's a whole other topic. Sorry.
Guns and steam train rides, America became known as the land of the free, which must have come as a surprise to all the slaves. But by finally thinking hard about the subject, the people of the northern states made a horrifying discovery. that inside each slave was an actual human person.
Oh,
Abraham Lincoln was shot in
that's
the
harsh.
theatre box, wasn't he? Where is that on the body?
Oh, I think.
And why was he...
What?
That inside each slave was
What
an
did she say
actual
about
human
Abraham Lincoln?
person. Abraham Lincoln was shot in the theatre box, wasn't he? Where is that on the body?
Oh, I think.
And why was he shot? Was it because
Good.
he wouldn't take his hat off? Because that's quite annoying in the theatre, isn't it, when someone's in front of you with a hat on?
Well, he was in the
How did being shot in the head affect Lincoln's ability to lead?
He was
Well, I
dead.
ended it because he died
Yeah.
about 12 hours after he was shot.
So he couldn't carry on.
He couldn't. No, not as a corpse, unfortunately.
I love that she. Okay.
Lincoln's light may have been snuffed.
I'm afraid.
Why don't bicycles have toilets? You know, it was
Sorry, I had nothing to say on Lincoln on that one. It's just he was. All I can tell you is he was shot like 5 days after the Civil War. I know she's just doing a comedic bit. There's not a whole lot of history.
to save you having to get off. I might write that down and copyright it. Even without a toilet, the Wright brothers' historic
It's on the
flight
plane.
changed transportation forever in ways that still aren't fully understood. The Wright brothers did the first proper flight over 100 years ago. How come we're still not any closer to working out how aeroplanes actually work? That's your theory. Do you want to hear my theory?
Okay.
I think they run on belief. It's just because we believe planes can fly that they do. So the media has to keep up the pretense, or they're just going to start dropping out of the sky. Same with Wi-Fi. There's no way that's real. We just have to go along with this pantomime. The Civil
Oh my god. Did you imagine sitting through that, just keeping a straight face? Okay.
War tore America apart, didn't it? Brother turned on brother. Did
Civil
anyone
War.
get so conflicted they turned on them? But
I think she was going to say turn on
Abraham
themselves. It was said that it was brother against brother. It was true. There were a lot of different reasons for that. There were border states between the North and the South, like Kentucky, Missouri, Washington, D.C., just a lot of them like that. And in some cases, there were people who believed that slavery was wrong. And that was more towards the later part of the second half of the war. The aims of the war changed, or the reasons for the war kind of changed. There were people who had different beliefs, and actually families, even after the war, didn't talk to one another. There was a famous general named General Thomas, George Thomas, I believe. And yeah, it was battle in Nashville, and he was called the Rock of Chickamauga for a famous stand he made there against the Confederacy. He was a Virginian that fought, and Virginia was in the South. He was a Virginian that fought for the North. His family disowned him. During and after the war, even his family had a picture of him, and they turned it around and faced it towards the wall. It caused a horrible divide amongst families, especially right in that border state, because some of them like Kentucky was a neutral state, and nobody wanted to provoke Kentucky in the beginning, and that's where you really see that kind of stuff. So right there, Washington D.C. is actually located below the Mason-Dixon line, which is supposedly the line for the North and the South, and it's below that. So the first thing they did was secure Maryland, which is the state just north of Washington, D.C. So right in there, you've got families that are different. They even created the state of West Virginia. Some fought for the North, some fought for the South. That's the brother against brother thing.
The story didn't have a happy ending. 5 days after the North won, a terrible fate befell him. He was forced to go
Lincoln?
to the theatre to watch a play.
And I don't like going and watching plays. I don't know about you guys.
He was put out of his misery by a kindly gunman, but cruelly, not until the third act.
But not until the third act. That's great. That's John Wilkes Booth. By the way, John Wilkes Booth Lincoln was watching a play called My American Cousin, which is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, a comedy. He was put out of his misery only by the third act. Okay, so he had gone through 3 acts, and then John Wilkes Booth came and shot him. If you're wondering who, like, you hear the name John Wilkes Booth, and every American goes, "Guy shot Lincoln." What you may not realize is, imagine if, and this is really what it was kind of like. Imagine if maybe Brad Pitt or Leonardo DiCaprio, or some of these bigger names in Hollywood went out and shot the president. That's what was going on. People knew who John Wilkes Booth was. He was very famous. And so it was 5 days after Robert E. Lee surrendered his army at Appomattox Courthouse in the presidency, and people were terrified. There's a whole thing called April. There's a book called April 1865, and it was this month people were scared, especially in the South, because Lincoln had said, malice towards none and charity towards all. He was willing to say, let bygones be bygones after the Civil War, which is part of, I think, the genius of Lincoln. He was like saying, okay, the war's over. This was his attitude. The war's going to be over, and when it ends, they'll be our countrymen again. So he was willing to say, look, if we go in it with a negative attitude, we're going to have problems. And so a lot of people in the South were like, you know what, we lost. But apparently this guy's attitude is that they're not going to be too hard. They're not going to rub it in our faces. And then 5 days later when he was shot, people in the South were like, oh no, this is not good. Because his vice president was actually from Kentucky. Wait, Kentucky? Tennessee, I believe. The only senator before becoming vice president that was from the South that stayed with the North. And it turns out that he was one of our worst presidents ever, because he did not put in this sort of reconstruction that Lincoln had really put a lot of thought into. He was kind of harsh, and he really didn't take the victory, if you want to call it the victory of the war, input all the aims that they wanted to get done into the South. And so what you have basically after the Civil War is then you have to deal with civil rights, which is just another part of, it's not slavery, but it's really close to it. And you have people working around the law to keep them down. Sorry if that's long-winded, guys. I hope you're all doing well. Thanks for watching the second part. I hope it reacted the way you wanted. That's the way I guess that's the way I see it. I have no problem talking about this. We're not perfect people by any means. Thank you again. Don't forget, let me know what you think in terms of new things to watch. I think I'm going to be doing the Blackadder coming up. I'd like to take a look at that. I find it intriguing. Thanks for the thumbs up, and thanks for subscribing, and I'll talk to you guys later.